Good afternoon. I'm Brian Ross with a special report involving convicted billionaire sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and a lawsuit that would have featured for the first time the public testimony of some of his underage victims. But this morning, as jury selection was scheduled to begin, Epstein agreed to settle the case out of court, avoiding the public airing of his very dirty laundry. The trial today would have revolved around what was a 10-year-long feud with a lawyer, Bradley Edwards, who represented several of the underage girls. After Epstein first sued Edwards and then dropped the suit, Edwards turned around and countersued Epstein. Epstein was not in court this morning, but one of his lawyers, Scott Link, read a statement from Epstein acknowledging he was wrong to go after Edwards in the first place. There was no mention of any financial settlement in all this, but by Epstein agreeing that he was wrong and that what he said was false, that's an incredible admission, isn't it?
It is. It didn't surprise me at all. I think that in terms of Mr. Epstein, I think the biggest concern was that they were going to, as you said, air his dirty laundry. And so I don't think he wanted the public to actually hear from the specific victims that were going to make the allegations that happened several years ago kind of come to life now.
Is that a disappointment in a way? This would have been the first time the victims had spoken in a public way in court.
It's a great question, and here's the Bradley Edwards said that it was a victory for the victims, and one wonders, is it a victory for the victims? It's a victory for Bradley Edwards because he gets the apology that he wants. He gets the recognition that he had a valid argument in terms of representing these individuals. But I think the question is, did these victims want to be heard? I mean, we think about the Weinstein case. We think about many cases that have come to light lately where the victims want to, tell their story. And so this kind of has stopped that from happening. So one wonders how the victims are going to view this.
They can still tell their story publicly, but there's not the protection of testifying in court.
Correct, and I think that it was a perfect sounding board for them in terms of coming forward. Yes, I think that one of the things may very well happen now is now that this has been settled, and in a sense Epstein has acknowledged that there was no wrongdoing on the part of the attorney, it may allow for additional victims to come forward. There seems to be a plethora of them that were interested in coming forward and telling their story. It also may have some implications, not just for Epstein, but for those that surround him. Because remember, there were allegations regarding not just Epstein, but some of the individuals that surrounded him.
Right. Epstein had several prominent friends, including current President Donald Trump and former President Bill Clinton. And while they were not going to be on the witness list for this trial, the lawyer for Edwards said their names were certainly going to come up in this case. Was there pressure, you think, from them against Epstein to prevent this from happening?
It's a great question. Look, we haven't talked about Jeffrey Epstein for a while. It had kind of gone quiet until this came about. And so I'm sure he's getting pressure not just from those in political power, but also his own attorneys, because I don't think they want him airing this dirty laundry. And again, remember, there are a lot of questions that are being raised right now, especially because of the fact that one of the prosecutors was Mr. Acosta, and there's some questions about wrongdoing, alleged wrongdoing, and giving him the break he got all those years ago. And so because all of that is happening right now, one wonders if he kind of got out quickly, especially with the environment we're in today where, remember, he's looking at a settlement that one assumes that there's a hefty amount of money to be paid.
Right. No mention of that. It was a full-throated apology that Epstein delivered, although he did not go to court to do it himself. His lawyer did read the statement saying he was wrong to do this, that Mr. Edwards is doing a very good job, aggressive job for his clients. That must have really hurt Epstein to have to say those words, at least have his words said on his behalf.
Yeah, and one thinks, to be honest, it seems like it's written by Mr. Edwards, yes, not by Mr. Epstein. And I think that if I were Mr. Edwards, the only way I would take that apology is if Mr. Epstein had been in the courtroom himself, but that's just me.
Well, Mr. Edwards, for him, it was a clear victory, and he was quite celebratory in a news conference after the statement was read in court.
Well, just so that we're very clear about what was going to happen and what was not going to happen, which is something that weighed into all of the decisions that we made, the court made it very clear that he was not going to allow this case to turn into a trial about whether and to what extent Jeffrey Epstein molested dozens of children. It was not going to be about that. It was only going to be on Jeffrey Epstein's assault on me, where he made allegations that I had made up certain of those allegations. And so there might have been 3 victims who would have testified in some very watered-down fashion. And everyone looking for the salacious or sordid details would have been grossly disappointed. This would have revealed itself as the distraction that Jeffrey Epstein wanted it to be in reality. Those victims, though, because of the good journalism, and Julie Brown, I want to thank you specifically for really just digging in. Everybody for 10 years has taken snippets of information and tried to make headlines, sometimes right, sometimes wrong, sometimes true, sometimes false. I felt like half the time I was just trying to correct a record. Finally, we had somebody just dig in and get it right. Still the tip of the iceberg, but everything is getting it right. And you know what? I'm now getting calls from my clients who have been hidden, who have been pushed into silence, scared to death, finally saying, one, Brad, thank you for standing up to him and pushing him to the brink till he had to admit, you win, he lost. Thank you. Second, they're willing to talk. They want to share their story. This was part of their healing. This was never about me. I took this case to the end for them, and the focus should go back on them. The focus should never have been on me, and sitting through 2 weeks for me to prove that everything that I've been saying from the beginning of time till now is true, and everything in retaliation that was said by Jeffrey Epstein against me to try to extort me into abandoning my clients, which I refused to do, was false. I didn't need those 2 weeks. You heard it in his own words. What more can I ask for in the fact that I got to do that without needing to draw my clients in to testify and be cross-examined and get beaten up for no reason and suffer and hurt any further? Wasn't fair to them. So what happened today was a win.
Lawyer Bradley Edwards taking a victory lap. Here is the statement as read by Mr. Epstein's lawyer in court this morning. While Mr. Edwards was representing clients against me, I filed a lawsuit against him to which I made allegations about him that the evidence conclusively proves were absolutely false. The truth was that his aggressive investigation and litigation style was highly effective and therefore troublesome for me. The lawsuit I filed was my unreasonable attempt to damage his business reputation and cause Mr. Edwards to stop pursuing cases against me. It did not work. Despite my efforts, he continued to do an excellent job for his clients and through his relentless pursuit held me responsible. I am now admitting that I was wrong and that the things I said to try to harm Mr. Edwards' reputation as a trial lawyer were false. I sincerely apologize for the false and hurtful allegations I made and hope some forgiveness for my acknowledgement of wrongdoing, Jeffrey Epstein. So, Julie, that's quite a statement, right?
It is quite a statement. I don't mean to chuckle, but, when Brad Edwards says Mr. Epstein, gave his mea culpa in his own words, I don't think they are in his own words. And so those, again, as I say, I think those are the words of Bradley Edwards as to what he wanted Mr. Epstein to say. And I think Mr. Epstein had to eat a lot of crow in order to make such a statement. And it's in a statement that not only acknowledges all the wonders of Brad Edwards, but also acknowledges that Jeffrey Epstein was completely in the wrong for everything he had done.
And in this lawyer feud, lawyer Edwards against Mr. Epstein, it became a 10-year-long struggle with allegations back and forth, Epstein using a very powerful, prominent team of lawyers against Edwards, who pretty much was battling on his own.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I mean, one wonders if the environment wasn't the way it was today, that we would be seeing the same results. I think because of kind of what's happening in the past year or two, we're seeing those who have victimized or allegedly victimized women and young women over the past decade, if not more, not necessarily coming to justice, but being acknowledged or being, in a sense, brought out to shame in terms of the community. And Jeffrey Epstein, although he did, in a sense, plead guilty to a much lesser offense, which is a whole other story, many years ago, many question whether he actually got punished enough. And this is just another step in maybe that direction.
Well, that is part of this explosive Miami Herald investigation, which broke last week regarding the lenient deal that federal prosecutors gave Mr. Epstein. He only served 13 months in jail. Ordinarily, charges involving some 40 underage girls, including an allegation of rape, could have led to life in prison. So there's much more to come on this breaking story when we return. What Edwards and his lawyer Jack Scarella are talking about is the extremely lenient deal that Epstein was able to cut with the federal government. Instead of facing a possible sentence of life in prison for the sexual abuse and alleged rape of dozens of underage victims, Epstein was allowed to plead guilty to 2 state charges involving prostitution and spent only 13 months in a county jail, from which he was able to actually check out 6 days a week to go to his office. And as the Miami Herald reported, and as Scarella referred to in a blockbuster investigative report, none of the victims knew in advance of the lenient treatment federal prosecutors gave Epstein. That's now how it's supposed to work. Not at all. And now members of Congress are demanding an investigation. And we're joined again by Julie Rendelman and in Orlando, Florida, Natalie Jackson, to talk about the process here of the underage victims never being told what was going on. Is that how it's supposed to happen?
It's unheard of. I was a prosecutor for over 20 years, and in even the most minor of cases, including assaults and misdemeanors, we informed the victim, obviously, when we could and when we could reach them, as to what the disposition was going to be. The idea that, and keep in mind, remember, these are unnamed, so that they're basically running the gamut of basically including anything and everything Jeffrey Epstein ever did as the possible victims that he's going to now be able to get away with. So it's absolutely unheard of. Natalie
Jackson, let me ask you, what is your own reaction to this, what people are calling a sweetheart deal?
I agree. It's unfathomable that a criminal defendant would get a deal like that, especially here in Florida, where we have very strong victim rights laws. And to have them not even be able to face the defendant in this case, and to have the defendant get a probation deal where he only spent 13 months on probation for allegedly trafficking over 40 underage girls. That's amazing. And it's also very disheartening for women's rights and women's laws.
Natalie and Julie, the victims have said they were never even told this deal was being made. It was kept secret. And in fact, they were under the impression the FBI was continuing its investigation of this case. There seems to be huge misconduct here on somebody's part.
Yeah, I mean, look, we see in federal courts all the time, there are cases, we've seen mob cases where an individual is accused of killing 15 people and he ends up with such a sweetheart deal that he doesn't go to prison. So, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. That's what an investigation is for, is to make a determination as to whether or not there was wrongdoing. It obviously smells when we look at it. It doesn't pass the test when we think about it. But, I'm trying to be open-minded, and I think that's what an investigation would be for, is to try to figure out why it is he got this sweetheart deal, and did anyone do any type of favors for him or someone else in order to give him that deal.
And as has been reported, the deal was made by the then U.S. Attorney in Florida, in the Southern District of Florida, Alexander Acosta, who is now the Secretary of Labor in the Donald Trump cabinet. Lots of questions for him when he was confirmed, and lots of questions seems to come up. Natalie, what are the questions you would ask Mr. Acosta about the deal he made with Epstein and his prominent team of lawyers?
Well, I would ask him the main question: did he talk to the victims, the alleged victims, and did he get any input from them before he made this deal? What kind of investigation did he do in this case? I think that keeping an open mind is important, but I think that the fact that the civil suit that just settled to keep victims from speaking, I think that is very telling.
And now here's what Edward and his lawyer had to say about all of this at their news conference today outside the courthouse. Bradley Edwards suggesting essentially, Julie, that there could be new criminal charges brought against Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, I mean, time will tell. I mean, the statute of limitations has probably run in terms of many of the complainants we're talking about. Very different from Bill Cosby, where there was at least one complainant that they were able to move forward on. But again, you know, it isn't just about Jeffrey Epstein right now. It's about the conduct of the U.S. attorney at the time, conduct of, you know, law enforcement, and those are the things that may actually be, in a sense, more relevant than actually Jeffrey Epstein himself.
And Natalie Jackson, let me ask you, in Orlando, Florida, is there a law that could have been more recently broken by Jeffrey Epstein, or the statute of limitations takes care of all that?
Well, I think the statute of limitations does take care of all of that. I think it's interesting that the attorney for Mr. Edwards, he suggested that there could be a recession of the plea deal that was reached in the federal case. I'm not so sure about that. I don't know if double jeopardy takes a hold or anything like that. But I do agree that there may be other auxiliary crimes that are a part of this case on the part of maybe police officers, investigators, the attorney general, and those type of people. So I do think that there could be other crimes that stem out of this case.
Natalie Jackson, Orlando, thank you very much. When we come back, one of Jeffrey Epstein's legal advisors and a man himself who was accused of wrongdoing by one of the underage girls, Alan Dershowitz, when we return.